Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution of the United States. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this ongoing program. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and thank you, those of you who are tuned in to today's version of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. I am Bill O'Brien, and I welcome you to today's program. I'm going to give phone numbers, and then I understand we have a caller on the line, so I'm going to go directly to the caller. But let me give the phone numbers, and then when we complete our call, I'll try to remember to give these again. Our phone number is area code 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. And you can reach me directly. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. waobrien906@gmail.com. Before we even get into today's program, let's welcome a caller from across the ocean, I understand. We have Scott on the line, and Scott's calling us from Sweden. Hi, Scott.
Hello, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
How are you?
I'm pretty good. First of all, I want to say I'm a big fan of the show. It's a real mind extender. I get to thinking. I'm always a week behind listening to the podcast. It's usually about my bedtime right now, so I can't ever really listen live. But you got me taking notes as an adult, and that's always a good thing.
Wait, now, Scott, if I can bother you, I'm getting a very muffled sound, and I'm not picking up everything you're saying, but I appreciate the compliment you made at the beginning, but after that I wasn't sure what you were saying.
Is it a bad connection?
I'm not grasping it. It's very muffled. I'm sorry.
Is it a bad connection?
Yes.
Well, the technology is supposed to be getting better. I'll just have to give up then.
Well, I am so.
Hold on, guys. Let me see if I can tweak a little.
All right, Bob's going to see if he can tweak the voice a little bit, because it's really. I don't want to. If I'm going to engage in a conversation, I surely if you take the time to call, I want to know what you're saying, and I know the other folks listening do as well.
Yeah, I hear you well. So.
Anyway, let's try and see if we can get something.
Okay. One of the things that's very interesting, I should say a little bit about myself. I left the United States in 1983.
Yes.
When I met a Swede who just refused to live in America. She just said that it was just too bizarre for her, and she brought me back here to Sweden.
Yes.
And I've always had this great interest in politics, and that's why I find your show fascinating, because it more or less is making a lot of things gel, which I was considering during the Vietnam War, the era in which I grew up. But having lived in Sweden now for 30 years.
Yeah, since 83, yeah.
Yeah. Is the connection okay now? Can you understand what I'm saying? Is it?
I'm not picking up that last part, Scott. I'm sorry.
Okay. I guess I'll just try some other evening then.
I don't know what, I hate to, because I'm really excited. Never talked to anybody from Sweden before. So I'm all excited.
Hey, Scott?
Yeah, baby.
Yeah?
I'm sitting here fooling with the EQ. I suspect what's happening with Dr. Bill is there's a whole lot of low end to your phone call. It's almost,
I don't know what that means.
Well, the low frequency, bassy stuff, not a lot of treble.
Should I speak in my Mickey Mouse voice?
No, well, are you just into the handset right now, or are you on a speaker?
No, I have a handset in my hand.
I'm just curious. Can you go to a speaker?
I don't have it. Well, no.
Rats. Sorry.
I can't do it.
I think what's happening is because the signal's coming to me, and then and we're transferring it to Dr. Bill.
Okay. Well,
I'm getting you real good, but I think it's getting lost on the way to Dr. Bill.
Yeah, I'm getting.
Okay.
It's very low. You're right, Bob.
I tell you, we'll do this, Bob.
Yes.
We'll discuss this over the internet, and I'll call some other day.
Okay, it sounds good.
I've used up a sufficient amount of time for a technical issue, and let's not push it any further. So carry on, Dr. Bill.
and wrap it into an email by all means, and send it to Dr. Bill, Scott.
I'd love it. Scott, let's talk again, because I really feel like I got all excited, and now I'm left hanging, and I know the people listening are as well. But I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll try again some other day when Bob and I maybe solve the technical issues.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I appreciate it. Bob, I appreciate your efforts, my friend. Thank you.
No worries, Dr. Bill.
Okay. We'll do the best we can, but I feel like we're starting from the bottom. We're climbing out of a hole because we had a great opportunity there, and it didn't quite work. But anyway, let me go back and give you the phone numbers again and invite you to call, and we'll work out these technical glitches. We're still, in my case, I'm still learning, and I know Bob is struggling mightily too. This is incredible to think that I could sit here and speak with somebody from Sweden in real time is just mind-blowing to me. But I still remember the day, I hate to date myself, but I still remember the day, the first time on a Sunday afternoon when I saw in Boston, I saw a live video of Times Square on television. It was with Dave Garroway. If that's a name, now talk about dating yourself. And Dave Garroway was the host, and it was a Sunday afternoon live program. And I can remember my amazement at looking at Times Square and seeing real people in real time from Boston. And I absolutely couldn't. I still remember the fact that I just sat there in amazement, and I couldn't believe. And now here I am in a conversation with somebody from Sweden. What a fantastic. I just want to say, before we get into anything else, that this speaks, while it has challenges associated with it, obviously, this speaks to the potential of what we're looking at. What an exciting world we have before us, I think. And I think as time goes on and we become much more comfortable with the technology and we're able to tweak the technology appropriately, the potential to communicate and communicate effectively. And what I mean is actually listening to what other people have to say and what other people think. It's just wonderful. The potential is wonderful. And very honestly, for those people that become very frustrated with the way things are sometimes, and it seems like nobody's listening and nobody cares and nobody with the power to do anything seems to be willing to do it, all of that potentially is going to change because technology seems to me to make it possible to communicate with people in ways that we've never been able to do before. It's going to be very difficult for people to ignore what we're saying or pretending that they didn't hear it or misinterpreting it or whatever, because there's going to be so many people that hear the same thing at the same time, and it's going to be very, very difficult. No longer are the vast majority of people going to be dependent on what the few tell them is going on and was said and was meant and all of those other things. The old idea of a few people interpreting the world for everybody else is fast coming to an end, and I think it's just fabulous. I think it's very exciting. Welcome to today's Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. I am Bill O'Brien, and I look forward, as I do every day, to our time together. I just hope that I can make the program worthy of your commitment of time. I mean that very sincerely. I appreciate it. I did understand the compliment that Scott paid at the very beginning of his comments. I did kind of understand that, but Bob Kincaid was right. The bass seemed to be overwhelming. It was almost vibrating, and all I was getting was a very muffled sound. I was unable to, and I really know that Scott has something very, very substantive to say, and I want to make sure I get it all. I wanted to touch on a few things just briefly, and I mean that we talked about yesterday. I don't want to go back through yesterday's program and repeat it again today. That's not very, very productive. But I was spending some time this morning thinking about yesterday's program and what we touched on, and I wasn't sure at the end of when the program first ended, whether in fact everything seemed to hang together appropriately or effectively. And the more I thought about it this morning, I was obviously thinking about what we might get into today. And I was thinking about some of the things that we touched on yesterday afternoon, and to be very honest with you, it was pretty substantive. And so, in my mind, I just ticked off 2 or 3 of the major issues that I thought, we touched on yesterday. And I thought that it might be well worth the time to go back and just touch on them again and then go on from there, if that's okay. And, please avail yourself of the phone number. Give me a call, area code 304-658-3333. I would love to hear from you, your ideas, your observations, your suggestions, your criticism, whatever. I'm receiving some very, very positive and very complimentary emails, and I appreciate that so much. I just, I wish sometimes that the other folks that are listening would be able to have access to your comments as well. I'm getting them in emails, and one of the emails that I got on yesterday's program, and I thought this is actually what prompted my thinking on this. I received an email on the issue that we were talking about yesterday about property. And specifically, we were talking about property qualifications for voting and office holding. And I thought about that a little bit this morning. When we got into it yesterday, I really didn't think about it at all. I just kind of talked about it. Excuse me. But today I had a little bit of time to reflect on it. And what I remember is all the way back in grade school that this idea of property qualifications for voting and office holding appeared, it seems to me that, as I recall, it appeared in every single textbook, in every single grade that I can remember. I mean, I can remember in elementary school touching on these kinds of issues. I had no idea what it meant. In high school, in college, in survey courses that I had in college, and in more advanced classes that I had in college, and even in graduate school, in textbooks and in other books I read. Historians talk about property qualifications for voting and office holding as if everybody knows what that means, that everybody was familiar with it. And, of course, it doesn't exist anymore in the form that it existed in the 17th and 18th centuries. But it just occurred to me on reflecting upon this morning that it's not really that clear to most people, but it's one of those things that everybody's read, everybody's heard the phrase, property qualifications for voting and office holding, but it's one of those things that nobody really thinks about. Everybody assumes that since it's so prevalent, it seems to be everywhere in every single book, history book that anybody's ever read, that it's something most people never speak about or never draw attention to, I think because they feel, God, it's everywhere. I've seen it 100 times before. If I'm going to look stupid if I ask what it is, because it's there. Everybody's always seen it. I've never heard anybody ask what it means. So therefore, I would be asking a stupid question. I would sound foolish or naive or ignorant or whatever if I asked that question. So I won't. And so the fact of the matter is, people don't think about it. And what we talked about a little bit yesterday was what, in fact, it does mean. And basically, it's based on the idea that what one has, and this goes back to the early modern, to the medieval idea of property and what property means in the world. the property that one owns determines who you are in society, and you know, where you stand, what respect you have. People who recognize you at a certain period, as a certain person in a certain class with certain rights and certain obligations and certain benefits and all the rest of it. So your property is literally the defining issue in terms of who you are. It's very interesting. You can see this if you read the person that I'm thinking about, and there probably are better examples of this, but the one that I'm most familiar with is reading the letters and the journal of George Washington. And if you read, some of it is pretty dull, pretty dry. It's details. He talks about things that he's bought that are being imported from England, wine and various kinds of materials to make clothing and you know, dinnerware and wine glasses and cutlery and all the rest of it. And he talks about what he made, you know, what he paid for it and all the rest of it. Some of it's pretty dry stuff. But the fact of the matter is, if you kind of read enough of it, you begin to get the idea that what Washington is telling us, in a sense, is that everything that people know about me and think about me, whatever respect people are willing to give me, is contingent on the property that I own. My position, my influence, my status, everything is contingent on that. And that's not just, you know, one or a few persons that we're talking about. That's the general assumption about the structure of society. And the conclusions, the logical conclusions that one draws from that are that those people who have the most are obviously the most capable. And when I say are obviously, I don't necessarily mean to suggest that it is obvious, but it's assumed to be obvious. And obviously, I've used the word again, those at the top of the ladder, so to speak, those who are in positions of power and influence in society, are not going to do or say anything to raise questions about those assumptions. In other words, they're very comfortable with the fact that the honor and the position that they hold in society is based on what they have, and that those who are below them in the social ladder, so to speak, are willing to allocate to them special privilege and position based on what they own, what they're worth. No, they're not going to change that. So for the general population as a whole, these are assumptions about the way that society functions on a day-to-day basis that people don't question. It just is. For example, one of the most fascinating things you can see, if you ever get a chance to go to Williamsburg, to Colonial Williamsburg, and go to some of the colonial churches there in Colonial Williamsburg, or in Richmond, Richmond, Virginia, St. John's Church, I've attended that, and some of the churches, some of the old Puritan churches in Massachusetts, in the Boston area. And what you find is that the most prominent people sat in the most prominent pews. Where you sat in church was a function of who you were and what position you held in society as a whole. So this was very important stuff. And those people, without or with very little property, not only couldn't vote and couldn't run for office, but when it came time to go to church on Sunday, they kind of trickled around. They were the ones that sat in the back row. They're the ones that stood against the back wall, so to speak. Because it would be considered uppity that for people to step outside their place, as it were. And so people didn't do that. And so the point that I'm making here is that property is very, very important, not only for what it's worth in financial terms, but for what it's worth in political and social terms as well. And what we talked about yesterday, the concept of stake in society, this is kind of the issue that I wanted to focus on as review from yesterday. The idea of stake in society is based on the idea that people with property can be trusted because they have, the term that I used yesterday frequently was skin in the game. They have something to lose. They are better citizens because of the property they hold. Because since they have something to lose, they're much more conscious of what's going on and what decisions are being made, you know, what government is doing, what their representatives are doing, what taxes are, all of it. Because they've become very, very protective and defensive of what they have. And so the idea being that by owning property, you become conservative. You become a good citizen, theoretically. Because since you have something to lose, that makes you much more trustworthy. And it also makes you, and this is important, and I didn't mention this yesterday, it also is associated with the idea of independence, freedom. The basic premise was that the more dependent you are on others for the necessities of life, the less free you are, the less independent you are. What that means is you're going to vote the way you are told by those on whom you are dependent. So the basic idea was in society that the real prestigious positions, the positions of influence and power and prestige in society, should go to the people who are not dependent on earning a living. It's one of the most fascinating concepts that that I can run across, because it runs contrary to everything we've been raised to believe. We believe, all of us, when in the way we've been raised, that there is something noble associated with work. That those who work have integrity and dignity. Those who are self-sufficient and are willing to go out there and work hard in order to make what it is that what they need to support themselves and support their families. Those are the people that we have been led to respect. And we as a society become very suspicious of those who are looking for ways, the term that's used today frequently, I can't avoid it, the idea of getting on the system or finding a way to get, to gain an income without having to work for it. Mitt Romney gave this whole concept a really bad name when he referred to them as the 47%. Those people who are dependent, who are looking to be taken care of by government, of course, is Mitt Romney's point, and have no desire to get off the dole. They're very, very comfortable where they are. They enjoy being dependent, and they're more than willing to surrender to support government and support those in government who are willing to keep those checks coming. That's what Mitt Romney was talking about in that very famous video during the campaign that he was caught in when he made reference to the 47% who don't want to support him because they don't want to be independent. Again, we're talking about property and what its ramifications are for the structure of society. So what we can begin to see is that the entire social structure is built around the idea of property and the availability of property. And the assumption is, if you believe that property is readily available, and we talked yesterday about Jefferson and the purchase of Louisiana and all of that, if you assume that opportunity is readily available for those who are willing to go after it and work for it, then the logical result of that is that you become very suspicious of those that don't have any. Because the assumption is the only reason they don't have any is because they're not willing to go after it or they're not willing to work for it. And these, in your eyes, become very, 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 very suspicious types, as it were. So the whole idea in colonial society was, and if you read John Adams and Abigail Adams and the letters of these people who are talking about these things, what they are basically suggesting is that the people who call the shots in society, the people who are able to put the public interest ahead of their own private interest, are the people that don't have to work for a living. The people who are independently wealthy. The people who live off rent or credit. And that's George Washington. And so he becomes, his private paper, if you read his journal, it's just loaded with documentation of what he owns and what he's bought, how much he pays for this, that, and the other thing. But interspersed through it all is the idea of image, the idea of what people think of him, and why it's important to maintain this public image of independence and success. And his concern is that if anything ever happens to that, the minute word gets out that he might be in some sort of trouble financially, then his image and his status and his prestige and everything else are on the line. And so what these people are talking about is finding a way to make sure that the major decisions affecting society are made by those people who don't have a private agenda, who don't have, the word they use all the time is people who are disinterested. What that means is they don't have specific interests. They are not part of an interest group. They don't have a private or a personal agenda. People whose primary attention is focused on what's best for society as a whole because they've already made it. And their number one priority is to just make sure that nothing happens to jeopardize what they already have. So the idea throughout the colonial period and well into the 18th century, into the late 18th century, is the relationship between property and your power, your prestige, your influence, your reputation, everything. These things are all connected. So that's the basis of this idea of stake in society. Because given that reality, you have to be suspicious of people who are dependent on others exclusively and who don't have anything. People who will work for a living. People who literally live from check to check is the term we use today. Very suspicious. You can't allow them to have positions of influence and authority because they are not independent, free-thinking people. There's no way in the world that they are in a position to put the public interest ahead of their own self-interest. These people wear self-interest on their sleeves, so to speak. They're always looking for opportunities, for shortcuts, for ways and things to benefit themselves. And so you need to find a way that they don't get into positions where they have any power, any influence over decisions. And so property, or the lack of property, becomes the measure of one's credibility as a citizen. And the idea is if you don't have anything, you're suspect. If you can meet minimum requirements, then you have a right to vote, which means you have a right to say in what happens, in what government does. You have a right to vote for the representative or whatever. In other words, you are entitled to have a say because you have skin in the game. You have a vested interest in the outcome. But the idea is that in order to be a decision maker rather than just a participant who votes, then you need to demonstrate that you're worth a lot more than that. That you are that much more independent than you would be just as a voter who can demonstrate that you're worth 50 pounds, if that's the criteria, which I believe I used Maryland yesterday as an example. And so the idea is that the amount of property you own seems to directly reflect the kind of person you are, and this is all assumption, but it reflects the person you are, the values you have, the talent you have. And the assumption is if you want a major position of decision making, if you want to be someone who speaks for the masses, for everybody else, that makes the big decisions that affect society as a whole, then you've got to demonstrate. People have to be assured that this is not a personal agenda on your part, but that you are independent, you are disinterested, and your priority is the public interest. That's the virtue that these people talk about. The idea of civic virtue is willingness to put private interest aside in favor of the public interest. And the assumption is only certain people can or will be trusted to do that. Those are the kinds of people that need to be in positions of authority. And the reason I mentioned this, we've gone pretty much the first half hour of our program today, and I don't want to beat this to death, but I think it's very important. And one of our listeners sent me an email about this, about the whole idea of property. And the idea that was expressed in the email was that all of this stuff is really a cover for controlling the economy. In other words, the whole email was based on the idea. The key here is those people who are controlling the economy want to keep control of it. And so therefore this whole social thing is a scheme. The implication is it's a scheme or it's a way, it's a strategy that those in positions of power use to control everybody else. But the real issue is control of the economy, is power. And of course, if you extrapolate that from the 18th century and you bring it up to today, with the whole idea of the incredible inequity in distribution of wealth and income in our society today, it's very obvious why people think that, and why people have continually thought that. The only issue that I have, and I'm not going to, I think the thing we need to be aware of is not only the cynicism that is reflected in that. I can't prove that it's not true. I don't think anybody can. But in order to believe that it is true, you have to believe in some pretty incredible things. You've got to believe that there's a conscious effort to manipulate public opinion in more detail, in more ways than any of us have ever dreamed possible before. In my mind, there's absolutely no question that the vast majority of people believe this. Not only that, but for new people coming into the new world from foreign countries, immigrants. This is the message that society gives to new arrivals, not only in the 17th and 18th century, but up through the 19th and early 20th century as well. That we want people who are willing to work, and in this society, you will get every opportunity, every chance in the world to make it. The implication is, if you don't make it, it's your fault, not ours. Society owes you nothing except an opportunity. What you make of yourself is up to you. That's the message. And that's the opportunity that has brought millions and millions of immigrants into this country. It is, if you think about it, fantastic. Because no place else in the world offers anything like this. The question that all of us have, the challenge that society has, is to make sure that that opportunity, within reason, is real. It is very important that people believe that. Because if people stop believing in the American dream, then the society and the social structure that we've all known about, that we take for granted, is in jeopardy. What people believe is very, very important. But there's something, it seems to me there's something else beyond that. And that is, people are willing to believe it if they see evidences, even occasionally, that it's true, that it works. If society is never willing to provide real-life examples of success, then people will stop trying. One of the things I notice, I've been reading articles, and a number of you have sent me links to very good articles. I'm very, very interested, and I think in coming days and weeks we'll be into this more. I'm very, very interested in the whole idea in today's society of working people. Unions. The working man. And the statistics, the data that is showing over and over again that people who are working for a living today are proportionally making less than they did in the 1970s, for God's sake. The American dream is working for a few people. But for more and more of American society, it really is not working. At least not in ways that we have been raised to believe it ought to work. How many times have you heard recently in articles and in discussions on television or on the air, on radio or whatever, that this is the first generation in America where it is pretty clear that people are facing the reality that the younger generation is not going to face even the same, not even have the same opportunities that many of their parents or grandparents had. That this society that we are living in today, for many people, offers less opportunity than their parents had, or that their grandparents had. If you think about it, that's incredible. Because the whole thing that keeps society going is apparently out of whack. And it seems to me it needs to be fixed. And I guess all of us need to start thinking about ways to fix it, or try to fix it. The first thing it seems to me that we need to do is call some attention to it. The reason that I felt it was worth time yesterday, and more than a half hour of today's program as well, to talk about the way colonial and early founding period, the 18th, 17th, and 18th century America, colonial America, and into the period after independence. The way these folks looked at society and the way they looked at property is very important because it's what drives the whole operation. It's what brings people here from around the world. And as much as possible, it has to work. But even more than how well it works, it seems to me, people must believe that it does work. People must believe that there's opportunity for them. I'm struck. I'm going to just mention a couple of things in this context. Because to me, it speaks to the fact that the American dream still lives in the hearts and souls of people. I'm reading a number of articles, some of you have sent me articles, about the plight of working people in contemporary American society today. And the fact that, many of them are working for less per hour than, proportionally, than people who did the same kind of jobs made 25 and 30 years ago. And one of the things I notice in reading these accounts is that many of these people talk about going back to school and changing careers. Many companies, many corporations have created their own universities, their own colleges. Not only to train their own people in how to do a job, but to provide a mechanism whereby people can move up the ladder within the corporation. And there's story after story after story of working people who are struggling and working two jobs. I was reading in one of the articles that I read earlier today about somebody was trying to support a family and working full time and selling blood plasma in order to supplement income, in order to take care of the kids and stuff. So we're talking about people, we're not talking about lazy people that won't work. We're talking about people that are struggling and working two jobs and three jobs and all the rest of it. And of course that's the irony, because you'll hear conservatives all the time talk about all you have to do is look at the help wanted ads in the newspaper. There are plenty of jobs out there. Americans just don't want to work. Well, the response that I enjoy to that is the idea, yeah, there's a lot of those jobs out there. There's 2 or 3 for everybody who's out of work. Everybody who wants you don't need a job. There's 3 jobs. You'll need them all. Because they don't have benefits or they don't pay as much or whatever. And, and people at the same time will speak about right to work. It's amazing, the rhetoric that is associated with this. But the point that I'm trying to make is that you find people who are taking these courses and going to school on weekends and taking online courses and degree programs and all the rest of it because they believe the message. In this society, everybody has a shot. If you get a degree or you develop a new skill or a new talent or something like that, there's opportunity, there's a place for you, there's an opportunity for you to grow and prosper. And people believe that. The dream lives. What we've got to recognize is that there are an awful lot of circumstances out there that seem to be curbing the dream. That needs to be the focus of our attention. Yes, we need to spend time encouraging people to improve their skills and to become more employable and to develop good work habits and issues of responsibility and dependability and all the other things that we grew up believing in. Of course. But I would suggest to you there's quite a bit of responsibility on the other end. And that's to make sure that there's a payoff for the investment of time and money and effort that many people are willing to put into their own future. And it seems to me that's where we've got to put an awful lot of our attention. We cannot allow society to buy into the gentry or the landed aristocracy idea from colonial America, from the old country, from Great Britain, if you will. The old idea that people just don't have it, that there's opportunity out there, and if people are struggling, it's because they just don't have what it takes, and they can't make it. And at the risk of going off on a tangent, which I'm not going to do, I would suggest that may be one of the major failings of our education, our K through 12 education system in this country. I think it's absolutely critical. And what I mean is, we spend more time in our classrooms demonstrating to those who don't have skills that they don't have them than we do helping to identifying and developing the skills that people do have, that children do have. Basically, we're operating, if you look at our education system, we have chapter and verse of stories where people who teach college say, I can't really ever get a chance to teach what I really was trained to teach because the students I'm getting are not well prepared. They're not capable of grasping what I'm paid to teach. So therefore, I have to go back and teach things that these students should already know. And then if you go back to the high schools, you'll hear from high school students the same thing about middle school teachers. The students that come into my high school class are woefully unprepared. Many of them have never written before. They've never written a sentence. They've never read a book. They've never, da-da-da-da-da-da. And so in a sense, if the middle school teachers did what they were being paid to do and really educated their students, then the quality of what we do in high school, what I'm able to do, would improve substantially. And then you go to the middle school teachers, and it goes down to the elementary teachers. And the students we get are just not prepared. They're not mature. They don't have the right attitude. They're not willing to work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so ultimately, what all of that speaks to is the fact that what we're saying is my number one priority is not to teach people what I know. My priority is to eliminate the people who can't understand what I'm wanting to teach. And once I get rid of them and get down to the core of students in my class who really do understand and are capable of learning, then I can really teach. And the result of that mentality and the standardized testing that all of our teachers are subject to over and over is geared towards the same thing. We are all looking for the student, for the boy of best genius that Jefferson talked about in 1789. We are developing instruments and applying them, using them in our classroom to identify the boy of best genius that we can extract from the masses and send on because this person has demonstrated the capabilities of the kind of education we're capable of. The result of that is we have this incredible educational establishment the billions of dollars that are put into education, and, you know, inordinate amounts of that, an inordinate proportion of those resources are spent in weeding out rather than educating, in excluding rather than including. And many of our education systems, it seems to me, are not oriented towards educating everybody, but principally finding out who's educable and who's not. Separating, the term that everybody used to use, separating the wheat from the chaff. Jefferson used the term periodic skimmings of the cream of ability. The idea being that you need to put people into a competitive situation, because only when they are in a competitive situation does their potential rise to the top. And then you basically skim those who rise to the top. In other words, the people with the greatest potential, you can identify who they are. That process, it seems to me, is so demeaning to those who never get skimmed, who never make the cut. Kind of like when we were kids and we used to pick players to have two teams to play ball, whether it was baseball, softball, basketball, football, whatever it was. The kid that nobody ever picks. He's the kid that you put in right field, because chances are there aren't many kids that hit left-handed, so therefore there aren't going to be that many kids that are going to pull balls to right field. So the place the place you can put the kid that's liable to do the most damage to your team is often right field. So just watch a pickup game somewhere and look at who's playing right field. You know, I mean, some of us always end up playing right field. And if you think about it, wow, you know. And so basically, you know, going back, that's what this whole idea about property is. My point is that I think on the most cynical level, you can't say that all of this is a sham. You know, it's all a play. It's all a series of artificial assumptions and generalizations in order for those who control the economy to keep control of it. But the reality is that requires two things. That requires that we deal with two pieces of evidence which it's hard to contest. It's hard to argue against. One is that the vast majority of people believe this. And the second thing, which is a little bit more difficult to believe, is that those at the top are actively engaged in some sort of conspiratorial effort to dupe those who aren't in their class or in their category. And I have trouble believing that. I really do. I think that the rewards, it's obvious if you look at things like CEO salaries today. Just look at some of the data, some of the statistics that are coming out. I saw a reference today to the fact that CEO salaries on average over the last year increased by better than 16%. And that the average CEO salary in corporate America today is in excess of $15 million a year. That excludes bonuses and golden parachutes and all the other stuff. So the rewards are so lucrative that, you know, for a few, it's understandable that these folks would like to protect that and shield that from everybody else. I mean, but the fact of the matter is, those who are in positions who are successful, obviously believe the same story. They believe that the reason they're successful is because they're good. The more cynical side of that would be that these people really know that they don't deserve to be where they are, but they're just participating in this game in order to keep control of what they have from those that would seek to take it away from them. And I don't think so, because I don't think people are that honest with themselves. I think the majority of people who are successful believe they're successful because they're worthy of it. They're pretty darn good. But anyway, here we are. We're close to a whole hour on this idea of property. But you can't downplay, you can't minimize the significance, the importance of this, because this is the way people looked at society. And we have a lot of people, those who kind of lean toward the right, who basically will pick up in the founding period and move through the 19th century toward the Industrial Revolution, and they will begin to see the birth of free enterprise capitalism taking shape in America. And the point is that the whole idea of the development of free enterprise capitalism absolutely requires that this set of assumptions is accepted by the general population. So I think it's very, very important that we understand it. And I think it's very important as well that we understand not only what will keep the system on track, but that we are aware of the things that will knock it off track. Where the system is vulnerable, where the flaws are in the assumptions. And one of the things that I've concluded over the years is that this is one of the things that people have really had problems with Marx, with Karl Marx. Because think what you will about Marxism, but Marx understood capitalism like few people ever have. He knew where it was vulnerable. And he knew how to take advantage of the vulnerabilities, of the opportunities. And I've always believed that one of the reasons why so many people who hate Marx, people dream about finding a way to refute Marx and literally destroying him intellectually. But nobody's been able to do that. And I've always believed that one of the reasons is because Marx is probably brighter than most of the people who would set out to destroy him. It's kind of the same thing. A few weeks ago we talked about Charles Beard and the economic interpretation of the Constitution. So many historians of the Confederation period and the Constitutional period have wanted to refute Charles Beard, to totally destroy him, because they find everything that he says so uncomfortable, so un-American. But the fact of the matter is, nobody's really been able to do it. They find flaws in his research and various places he was wrong and assumptions that he makes which weren't quite true and all of that. But the fact of the matter is, in terms of refuting what the man says, people have not been able to do that. And I believe part of the reason is because you have to be blind. And many people are blinded by their own ideological assumptions and priorities and druthers. But you've got to be blind not to recognize that the things that Charles Beard is talking about are there. They're all around us. The difference is only a certain element of society knew about them. The vast majority of working people never even thought about being in a position where they could participate in stocks and bonds and investment in credit schemes and some of the other things that are going on. And that's I think that's one of the things that made Beard so very uncomfortable for a lot of people, because he was basically shining light on things that people didn't want too many people to know about, like the investment. And as you read the kinds of things that are going on today with the inequitable distribution of wealth and income in America, and you begin to see the way the laws are written, for example, related to taxes on capital gains, and the idea that if you can categorize some of your success under the heading of capital gains, you don't pay the same income tax rate that everybody else pays. You pay 15% or less, which is what Mitt Romney did. But most people don't have access to the kind of information to know even how to do that, let alone have the opportunity to do it successfully. I think the reaction to Snowden, to Edward Snowden, and the leaks, if you want to use that the term leaks, maybe the most uncomfortable thing for a lot of people is not the security issues that are being compromised by some of the information that Snowden is responsible, presumably is responsible for making public. But the mere fact that the information is being made public, that may be the crime. That may be the issue. People know things as a result of what he did that some people would prefer they didn't know. That in a society based in a participatory republic like ours creates problems, doesn't it? We've reached the top of the hour. Let's pause for a break, and we'll come back in 4 or 5 minutes, and we'll take on our second hour in today's version of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. I'm Bill O'Brien. I hope you'll stay with us. We'll be right back. I had the sound off. I'm sorry.
Jeff is holding for you.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.
Stand by. I'll bring him on.
Jeff, thank you very much. Hi, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bill. The email you received, it wasn't meant to sound, that's the trouble with emails, it wasn't meant to sound like a conspiratorial theory thought. It was just mentioned that the academic world, specifically you, for 40 years have been studying the Constitution, and I've never heard anybody explain it as well as you have, by the way. This is something I think is great. But
Jeff,
on the same token, my pleasure. But on the same token, we can't blame our corporations or Republicans or Democrats or conservatives or progressives. We're all, you and I, have been brought up in this system, and it doesn't just like we were cannibals. And when you say we have to fix the problem because for the first time, well, it's the first time in our lifetime that we've seen things get this bad, is strictly not because of the Constitution was written, from what I gather from you, to make sure the wealthy will actually run the system. And that's because prior to the Constitution, thousands of years before, it's always been set up like this. So we in fact are blind to, like I think it was Bob mentioned, that elephant in the room with three blind guys trying to explain what they see. They all see something different, but they don't see the elephant. I don't know how to get it. There is a major problem here, and the major problem is not a conspiratorial thing. It's the way the system runs.
It's the structure of the system is what you're saying.
The system is running, our political system is running, according to you and according to, if you sit back and look at it, it's running perfectly normal. It's protecting the individual rights. What happened was that the very wealthy people picked up on that. They control the media. When I say control the media, try to get a program like yours on mainstream media. It would not happen.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
So the big money is controlling the media. Now, let's go back again. If our political system is working the way it's supposed to work, the way Madison and Jefferson spoke about it, and we go back to I made some notes, but I can never read my notes. But anyway, and when you mentioned 15% tax structure, but the thing is, we don't know what the tax structure should be. I mean, there's no way of measuring 15% of what? Of your income, or what is your income? I mean, you have to keep on going back and keep on asking questions. When you mentioned, what's his name, the communist that people call it, I went blank on the fellow's name.
Marx?
Marx. Yeah, Marx hit the nail on the head. He's saying human labor is something that has to be dealt with. I mean, it's a very real thing. And Marx's theories, I thought, were very great, excepting for one problem. The same way the Occupy group saying it's not fair. You have to value my intellect and my labor, and you must pay me accordingly. But that's not the way our system works. It works within the cheapest economic structure we can get to make money for the very wealthy will allow the Occupy movement to get out of the way, because we don't care. The psychopaths are running the world, and they don't care how many people die. If you blow up mountaintops or you poison water, and there's a profit line to be made from that, that is perfectly legitimate in the way our economic system works. Now, this is not conspiratorial. This is the way it actually works, and we can't see it because we're right in the middle of it.
I understand what you're saying, Jeff. I do.
So the academia, I have lots of friends of mine, physicists and mathematicians, and it has worked great for my age, and we're at the same age. For my age bracket, you couldn't ask for a better quality of life for us. Not one way can we get a better life. I don't care. If we were kings, we couldn't live better than we're living now. I mean, the technology we have is absolutely fantastic. We can call anywhere in the world. But I can tell you for a fact, when I speak to people from India and I mention a minimum wage or a living wage, they love that idea for a 20-hour work week.
Yeah.
These people are stupid. They've been educated to the nines, but they can't live because the economic system on a worldwide basis doesn't allow them to live. Anyway, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I just had to bring it out. It's not a conspiratorial thing.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and again, I know where you're coming from. The question that I would ask you to think about, and I because I'm thinking about it. I'm not at all taking issue with your point of view. I'm just trying to take what you're saying to the next step, and that is this. When you talk about people blowing up mountains and doing all of the other things, again, it implies that they understand that this is one of a number of options, when in fact I believe that they only see this as the only option.
Of course they do, because that's the profit margin in it. Because our economic system says the only thing we have to value is how much money we can make for the CEO and the stockholder. Now, if you put the tax structure by happenstance before Reagan was in office, the tax structure by mistake worked so well that it wouldn't have been profitable to do the kind of damage these people are doing. But because they changed the tax structure to 33.33% and almost none whatsoever, and when you're very wealthy, it totally screwed up the system. And that's only because logically they said, I should keep what I make. Well, sorry, baby, you shouldn't be able to keep what you make, because you're making it on intellectual inheritance.
That's right.
The intellectual inheritance you've got to put back so the person sweeping the floor who may not have that ability you may have, that you were able to use, has to go back so that he can have the education, food, and shelter so he has a quality of life, and not slavery hours, but a minimal amount of hours, 15, 20, 30 hours a week, but no more than that, to have the basic good quality of life. This is not a conspiratorial thing. This is not and it's not the fault of the Republicans or the Democrats or the progressives or the conservatives. That's the way they see it. That's the way they were brought up to see it. So you can't blame them as an individual. They all want the same things we want. They don't want to drink poisoned water. They don't want to see their kids have to work 70, 80 hours a week. They don't want to have. They all want the same thing we all want. The problem is we've been brought up in this economic system which has never, ever worked for the poor. It's always worked for the very wealthy, and it worked for a very short time in the United States, and that's why this country is a great country, because we have a fighting chance. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother with these calls. We have a fighting chance if we just, for some reason, someone has to figure out what a measurement for what a human being is worth, and it cannot be done in currency. Has to be done in quality of life number, or quality of life figure. You can tack on a number if you choose, but we need to measure it in something like degrees or something like joules or something like anything that has to be something that gives people a worth. And that's where Marx didn't have the answer, because there was no way of measuring it. And Locke's stuff was great. And I think the concept of our Constitution is absolutely fantastic. But you'll agree it's working exactly the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, I understand, and I agree with you, and I agree with you more than I think you think I do, I think the whole idea of putting back, all I'm hearing as you're talking about the guy who's sweeping the floor, and you got to put something back. And that's what Andrew Carnegie said. And his basic point was, if we don't do it, speaking to the wealthy, if we don't do it, then somebody's going to come along and make us do it, and it's going to be government. And so the alternative, what's happened, is that instead of the wealthy buying into that message, what they've done instead is set out to demean government. In other words, to try to discredit government so that government cannot interfere with what they're doing.
I'm sorry, when you mention Snowden would never have this problem if we had a transparent government. The only reason why the government is not transparent is because if we had because it's a worldwide economic system, and they're trying to take advantage of that. There's nothing wrong with transparency, and even Snowden's father, that's why I brought Snowden back up, is because Snowden says he wasn't trying to hurt the people of America. He was just trying to show what's going on in the government. I'm sorry, the government is the people of the United States. We own the government, and it's up to us to make sure that it's valuable to our population and to the world population, because if we fix the world population or help the world population, we stop wars. Right. If everybody in the world had a quality of life, meaning education, and by the way, you don't have to take the education. I'm not suggesting that someone has to go to college. If they choose not to, they should not have to do that. But they need to have food, which is clean water, clean air, and clean calories. And they have to have a place to live that they're reasonably proud of for a very small amount of their hours of labor. Now, once you've done this around the world, you basically stop wars. There's always going to be crazies out there who want to kill somebody, but basically you stop wars. And by the way, I can prove that. My wife said to me one day as we're driving down through a major highway, and it had a 75 mile an hour both direction. And the only thing stopping people from going head on was a double yellow line. So people can respect that double yellow line. They'll respect human beings across the board, unless somebody decides they want to kill themselves or they get sick. But you see where I'm going with that? I'm sorry to.
That's good.
I have to get this out because it is not a conspiracy thing. When you were talking when you were talking earlier about the way the Constitution was developed, it sounded, I met some people from the Club of Rome, and it sounded just like those people. But anyway.
Okay.
Thank you very much for giving me the time.
I got you. Jeff, thank you, my friend. I appreciate your call so very much. And I appreciate the the idea, because again, when you use the word conspiracy, it's very bad. The only thing that I know, and you've made this point very well, Jeff, is that you can't assume that people people understand what the full impact is of what they are doing and the decisions that they are making. As you point out, it's because this is what they've been raised to do, and this is what they've been trained to do well. And anybody who basically combat them from a different direction is a potential threat to the world as they understand it. And my solution to this, my answer to this is, what we've got to do is make sure that more people understand more about the world than they do now. And that's kind of what drives me. I know it's kind of what drives Bob Kincaid and the folks at Head On as well. And Jeff, I'm pretty sure it's what drives you and Sue too. So thank you so very, very much for calling. I really appreciate it. I wanted to let me again reiterate the phone number and make sure that everybody has it, because we'd love to hear from you. Our area code is 304-658-3333. That's 304-658-3333. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. Where I wanted to go, and again, Jeff basically added to, rather, did not at all change direction from where we were. I think what the issue here is, the one issue that I want to kind of revisit for a second is that Jeff referred to, is that he made reference to the fact that the Constitution, as he understands it from what I've said. Please understand that what I'm doing is trying to understand it. I'm basically struggling to understand much of it myself, and so nothing that I'm saying would I be so bold as to categorize as truth or anything else. It's interpretation, and it's designed basically to encourage people to think about things they thought they knew. And what I'm hoping that we do here, and that's why I really appreciate calls from Jeff and Scott and everybody else. What we want to do is introduce the kinds of concepts, the kinds of ideas, the kinds of thinking that causes all of us to reflect a little bit more intensely on what we think we know. I'm struck by the old question that the question that the philosophers ask all the time. How do we know that how do we know that what we know is the truth? Why do we think it's the truth?
We now rejoin Dr. Bill O'Brien and the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. Here's Dr. Bill.
Thank you, Bob, and we really apologize for the breakdown. One of the systems went down, and we had to reboot the whole thing. And you know what it's like to sit there when you start your computer, and you just sit there and wait, and that's what we've been doing. What I was trying to, we've got 20 minutes left in today's program, and I just wanted to begin to get into an issue that we can pick up on tomorrow, which is some of the ingredients of leadership within the context of the parameters we've been talking about both yesterday and during our first hour, and today, and especially Jeff's call in this hour pretty much reinforced it. The whole idea of the perception of the economy, the relationship between property and power. And that's really what we're talking about. And that seems to lead us to James McGregor Burns's book on leadership, which, if you happen to look at a copy of it, The New York Times refers to it as the seminal book on power. Because what he's basically suggesting here is the linkage between leadership and power. And the point he makes very, very clearly is that those who would be leaders must have power. But all those who have power are not leaders. And the key to leadership within the context of the republic that the founders created is the positive, healthy, reciprocal interaction between leaders and followers. A leader, in order to lead effectively, must be in touch with followers. Two things related to that. One is that throughout history, the assumption was that the acquisition of power in and of itself created a leader. Unfortunately, many people believe that that's still true. And so what we are confronted with today, in many cases, not just in this country, but around the world, is the contradiction between those who have power thinking they're leaders, and the fact of the matter is there's not much leadership going on. That's the first thing that I would say. The second thing I would say is that we need to be as knowledgeable and understanding as possible about the nature of our political system and the extent to which it relies on, it must have, inclusion. One of the major historical problems, challenges that America has had throughout its history is that those in power, for one reason or another, have focused too much attention on issues related to exclusion rather than inclusion. The successful leader is going to find a way to successfully include everybody. Now, when I say everybody, I'm not necessarily talking about every individual. I'm talking about key interest groups in society, key factions, to use Madison's term. If a particular group is left outside the system, then there's no way that the system can affect what that group does, how it thinks, and what impact it has on the system at all. We are vulnerable to the word that I'm thinking of is vagaries, and that's not probably the best word I could use. But we are vulnerable to the changes, the shifts in strategy of groups outside our ability to control. One of the things that Madison and the founders were able to do in the Constitution is set up a political system which was designed to control factions, which was designed to bring everybody into the system and get everybody to play by the rules of that system. That means that the system is not subject to being bombarded from the outside by challenges and attacks from people that have major disagreements with it. The problem is that there were large numbers of people, groups, throughout our history that were excluded. Obviously, we spent most of our time yesterday and today talking about the poor, talking about property qualifications. The whole idea of property, requiring a certain amount of property for reasons that we've talked about, was principally designed to reserve participation in the process to those whose participation would be positive rather than negative. And it doesn't mean that everybody agrees. That was one of the most interesting experiences that you can have, is to read the interplay in the 1790s between Jefferson and Hamilton and the role that George Washington played as president, when he had two members of his administration, his finance minister and his secretary of state, at loggerheads, both of them speaking for large, significant constituencies of Americans. Washington was of the opinion, which was very standard, that if you disagreed with policy, if you didn't agree with the law as it was passed, as it was being enacted, then you became an enemy. You became an outcast to the system. There was nothing in Washington's frame. I said Madison, I mean Washington. There was nothing in Washington's frame of reference that understood or could accept the idea of what we call a loyal opposition. The idea that there could be honest disagreement on major issues between individuals or between groups of people, interest groups, and that both of them could be positions of people who were loyal Americans. Washington's sense was, you open up the system, you consider all of these opinions, all different points of view, but once the decision is made and the law is passed, that's it. If you don't obey it, you become a lawbreaker. The problem with that mentality is that it drives dissent outside the system where you can't control it. So in order to make sure that the system remains inclusive, you've got to make sure that everybody is admitted in and that everybody has access to the benefits of being in. That would be access to the media, access to free speech, access to the Bill of Rights, the right to assemble, the right to a free press, etc., etc., etc. That's the way the system was designed to work. In practical terms, however, the problem was that there were too many people excluded. Women, the poor, African Americans, slaves. What do you do with millions and millions of people who were brought here against their will? Ultimately, the institution of slavery is seen as the only way that you can manage or to control this potential problem area. Because there's no way in the world, for reasons which we won't go into right now, that the general population would accept the inclusion at this point of African Americans as citizens. So slavery as an institution becomes the only way to control people that you can't control the way you control other groups, which is to include them within your system. And throughout history, the definition of democratic in our society has been the extent to which we have been willing to bring into the system people that up to that point were excluded from it. Women, gays, unions, working people, organized labor, etc. And so, in a sense, what we're talking about with leadership here is the ability to conceptualize strategies driven with the goal of including everybody, because only if everybody is included can our republic work the way it was designed to work. With that in mind, I want to share with you a quote from historian Richard Hofstadter, who was a historian at Columbia University who wrote many, many books in the 60s and 70s and 80s about, he was considered to be one of the most notable people in what is usually referred to as the consensus school of American history. And Richard Hofstadter is making a distinction here between intelligence and intellect. Wow. We're at 51 minutes after the hour. We've only got 6 or 7 minutes left in today's program. So maybe this is about all we're going to have time to get our arms around today. So let's try to do that. Hofstadter's intent is to distinguish between those he refers to as intellectuals and those that he would characterize as intelligent. And this is what Hofstadter writes. He says that there is an ambiguity caused by our failure to distinguish between the intellectual as a relatively autonomous and detached figure and the intellectual as a person hovering in a particular cultural milieu or social class. And then he goes on to make the distinction. Intellect, Hofstadter wrote, Intellect, Hofstadter wrote, is the critical, creative, contemplative side of mind, whereas intelligence seeks to grasp, manipulate, reorder, adjust. Let me go back. Whereas intelligence seeks to grasp, manipulate, reorder, adjust. Intellect examines, ponders, wonders, theorizes, criticizes, imagines. Think about that. Intellect is the critical, creative, and contemplative side of mind, whereas intelligence seeks to grasp, manipulate, reorder, and adjust. Intellect examines, ponders, wonders, theorizes, criticizes, imagines. Let me just share with you the next sentence that James McGregor Burns includes here. An intellectual, he says, is something more. A person concerned critically with values, purposes, ends that transcend immediate practical needs. By this definition, the person who deals with analytical ideas and data alone is a theorist. The one who works only with normative ideas is a moralist. The person who deals with both and unites them through disciplined imagination is an intellectual. Think about that. An intellectual is something more. A person concerned critically with values, purposes, ends that transcend immediate practical needs. By this definition, the person who deals with analytical ideas and data alone is a theorist. The one who works only with normative ideas is a moralist. The person who deals with both and unites them through disciplined imagination is an intellectual. I would offer another conclusion to what James McGregor Burns suggests. I would suggest that the person whose priority is to grasp, manipulate, reorder, and adjust is a manager. A person who examines, ponders, wonders, theorizes, criticizes, and imagines is a leader. What the distinction here is important, because the suggestion is that people are either one or the other, and the real leader is both. And one of the major problems we find throughout history is that some of those who have been the most successful in organizing groups, I'm thinking of Marx, Lenin, Mao, Hitler, it's one thing to organize the group and create the ideology. It's something quite different to follow through and make it work. The successful leader, James McGregor Burns believes, needs to be able to do both. What I would like to do in our next program is pursue this idea of leadership even further. More specifically, I would like to draw the distinction between what many people refer to as negative freedom and something called positive freedom or liberty. One of the most important distinctions today is this idea of positive liberty as opposed to negative liberty. And that's kind of where I'd like to pick up in tomorrow's program. We are at 57, just going on 58 minutes after the hour. Apologize for the delays today, the technological breakdowns, and invite you to be back tomorrow. We'll continue with another version of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution. I'm Bill O'Brien. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful evening. Look forward to getting back together again tomorrow.